Righty, welcome back to the second part of our interesting study about the impact of the new imperialism on various countries and regions. You guys have already seen the first part of this slide. This is actually the second part, and it's actually a giant slide presentation. But for the sake of time, I'm only starting in the middle. I will upload the entire presentation, so make sure you get a chance to take a look at that. Let's get started. Picking up with our focus question for number 3, we've already talked about Africa. We've already talked about why Western imperialism spread so fast. Here we're going to ask and answer the following question. How did European nations extend their power into Muslim regions of the world? Now, there are some important empires and nations that we have to address. The big answer to the big focus question is that Muslim empires were in major decline by the time European nations start really imperializing and moving into the Muslim regions. That's one of the reasons why it made it so easy for them to take over something. The big empire, of course, is the Ottoman Empire. Remember, it's the Ottoman Empire that overtakes the Byzantine Empire that you learned about from Global 1. Well, the Ottoman Empire, by the time we get to World War I in 1914, is basically on the decline. People within the empire are calling for reform all over the place, and that's only going to increase the tensions among the different groups that live underneath the umbrella of the Ottoman Empire. We also have a lot of nationalism. People are not happy with the westernization that is taking place in parts of the empire, and that's going to inspire different groups. One of them being a group called the Young Turks. And the Young Turks were a liberal Muslim group who thought that for some reason this Christian Armenian group was out to betray them to the government. So they thought they were traitors, and as a result, they massacred the entire community. And it's one of the bloodiest massacres probably of the 20th century. It's terrible. Some Armenians actually do escape and moved to the United States, but a number of them were murdered. So you see how westernization and nationalism is having a negative impact on the way people are even treating their alleged brothers and sisters under this empire. Another important nation among the or in the Muslim Empire is Egypt. Now, Egypt decides that they're going to modernize under Muhammad Ali. No, not the boxer, but the politician. He is considered the father of modern Egypt because he is the one who really helps to modernize them, to upgrade them. And one of the ways he does that is through the building of the Suez Canal. Now, the problem here is that Egypt is going to run out of money. In order for Egypt to keep building this canal, which they think is going to bring them a lot of money, they have to borrow money. Well, guess who they borrow the money from? They borrow it from European countries. And because at some point Egypt's not going to be able to pay that money back, here comes Britain who says, listen, we're going to save the day. We're going to pay your loans for you on one control or on one condition. And that is that you actually give us control of the canal. And that is going to be a major, major problem for Egypt because now they've lost control of an important transportation and trade route. Another important empire in the Muslim world is Persia. Now, Persia is modern-day Iran. Just remember that. And when you think about Persia or Iran, think about one thing: oil. The reason why European nations are fighting over Persia is because of their oil. Persians don't like that because they understand that countries like Russia and Britain, they're not fighting over Persia because they care about the people. They're fighting over Persia because each country wants control of that oil. Because they know that if they control the oil, they'll control the world, basically. All right? India. This map does not lie. If you look at and I'm just going to use my arrow here. You look at this little legend right here. Look at how Great Britain systematically over centuries gained more and more control of India. And they do that first through the British East India Company and then finally through the rule of a viceroy. And basically what happens is this. British East India Company is making lots and lots of money. Now, Great Britain is not technically sanctioning the company to do this, but Britain, the government, realizes that, hey, this is really profitable, so let's get rid of the company and let's take it over ourselves. That's basically what they do. And it works perfectly. So how does Britain do it? We've already talked about the Sepoy Rebellion. You guys should know that. I just talked about the British East India Company. And what's going to happen is that as Britain gains more control over India, they're going to force India into unequal trade relationships, and it's not going to go well. And as a result, Indians are going to hate the British. There's just no way around it. I'm trying to be nice, but they hate Britain at this point. Which brings us now to Japan. Look at that face. That is Emperor Meiji, who was 15 when he became emperor of Japan. Not a big fan of Europe and not a big fan of the United States. And as you can see on your slide, you see why. The United States, of course, forces Japan into trade activity, which they don't want any part of. But it's easy to go over there because there are so many things that are out of whack in Japan. The Meiji Restoration is going to try to change that, and their strategy is very simple. Strengthen Japan to challenge the West. If you can't beat them, join them. And if you want to beat them best, beat them at their own game. So they westernize. They issue some political reforms like creating the diet. No, not the thing you eat. That's the name of their version of what we would call our Congress. And they have a strong central government, which is actually going to be key for them down the road for several years to come. They also strengthen their military. That is especially going to be important as we're talking about World War II and some of the things that they do as they face a showdown in 1945 with the United States and the dropping of the atomic bomb. But that later. I just couldn't resist bringing that up. China. Now, China is going to take a long time. Why? Because there's a lot of hot mess foolishness going on in China. European countries are crazy about China. And there are a number of conflicts and issues that are going to allow European countries to take over China, basically. How did imperialism impact the development of China? This is your sixth focus question. Well, here's the issue. A lot of European nations did not like the fact that China actually controlled their own trading activities with Europe. Europe did not have control. China had control, which makes sense because, hey, it's their country. But a few things are going to change that. First of all, the Treaty of Nanjing, which I actually gave its own slide, because it's a very important treaty for you to remember. It ended the Opium Wars, which I'm going to talk about in a second. I'm actually going to skip that because I'm going to come back to it. The Opium Wars, this is not funny. Britain basically turns China into a nation of drug addicts. They flood the market, or they flood China with opium to ensure that China would keep buying the drug. China says, no, we want to be drug-free. Britain says, no, and we wind up with a conflict. Britain, of course, is going to crush China and force them to sign that unequal treaty of Nanjing. Alrighty. So, again, similar to the other slide that you saw earlier, these are the provisions of the Treaty of Nanjing, and you can see why we call it an unequal treaty. China has to open all of their ports to Britain, forcing them to trade, of course. China is forced to give up Hong Kong, which is an important city, to Britain. If you want to know the inspiration behind a lot of those bad kung fu movies from the 1960s and 70s, like the Bruce Lee movies, it's this. Because there's always this tension between white Europeans and Chinese in the movies. Just a little aside there. I thought you'd be interested in that. Here is the kicker. Britain forces China to pay for all the destroyed opium. They basically force China to pay for all of the war damages, which is absolutely ridiculous. And they also gain the rights of extraterritoriality, and all of these conditions are going to favor Britain. It is totally not fair. Another rebellion, the Taiping Rebellion, 1851 to 1865. That's the big one. Big thing to remember about the Taiping Rebellion. 20 million people died during this war. The Qing dynasty, which is going to be the last dynasty of China as we know it, they're going to lose power because of this. You lose 20 million people, you're going to lose power. And that, of course, is going to make it easier for European countries to come in and start taking parts of the country that they want. 1900, the Boxer Rebellion. Coolest name in the world. The Righteous Harmonious Fists. This is an actual group that was dedicated to driving foreigners out of China. And unfortunately, they decide in 1900 that they're going to kill a number of foreigners. Well, what happens is that these European nations are going to send an army. They're going to surround the city of Beijing, which is the capital of China, and they basically kill the Chinese government. And China's really never the same after that. A couple of other points before we sign off. The Sino-Japanese War, 1894 to 1895. Again, another country coming in. This time, not a European country, but Japan. They come in. Now, Japan is much smaller, but this just demonstrates how weak China had to have been for Japan to have been able to come in and take over parts of their country. 1894 to 1895, no contest. China has no defense for it. And then finally, the open door policy was a policy actually proposed by the United States in 1899. And under this policy, all nations, and that's really all European nations, would have equal opportunities to trade in China. Basically, we say, we want what you have. And that's all there is to it. And China has really no say in it. There is nothing fair about the open door policy. It is what it is. So in the end, the rebellions and the invasions and the unequal trade treaties, they're going to completely weaken China by 1911. Now, 1914 is on the horizon, and this is where we're going to pick up at the beginning of third quarter. We're going to have a major worldwide throwdown, beatdown of a war. Because you can't keep going on and taking people's countries away from them. Someone is going to say enough is enough is enough. And it's going to happen in Europe. But you see that China is devastated by the impact of the new imperialism. It is not a good thing for their country. So if you want to know or understand why China is the way they are now in terms of restricting trade with foreign countries, you need look no further than this PowerPoint slide. They're still not happy about what happened to their country, okay, at the hands of white European countries. It is what it is. I hope that you play this video as often as you need to. It is available on Ngrade, or it will be in a few minutes. Please, please, please make sure you take a peek at it tonight. We're going to talk about it tomorrow in class. I will see you there. God bless, and take care.